Welcome back. Let's talk about what happens if you're behind on your taxes, if you haven't filed for the last 3 years, 5 years, or maybe even more. The reason it's so important now to discuss this and to make sure that your business is compliant is because of what's going on around us. The state of our country, our economy, our budget is putting a lot of pressure on SARS to collect more and more revenue. Project AmaBillions is the code name that SARS employees use for this drive to increase their collection efforts. Let's talk about it. Why is SARS under so much pressure to collect more revenue? The simple answer is there are not enough people paying their taxes. If we look at the latest SARS annual report, we see that the tax base is very small and SARS is under pressure to widen the tax base to have more people pay tax. So if you look at the latest report, you'll see that we collected 1.7 trillion rand in revenue. And of that 1.7 trillion, 80% of it comes from VAT, individuals, and companies. VAT constitutes 34% of revenues collected. Individuals, personal income tax, is 30%. And what's important to note is of that 30% of the revenue that's collected, that is personal income tax, only 10% or less of individuals who are registered to pay tax contribute 80% of that revenue. What does this mean? There are 7.6 million people who are registered on SARS and pay some form of personal income tax. And of that, 1.6 million contribute the biggest share, 80% of the revenue that SARS collects on personal income tax. So firstly, the base of 7.6 million people out of a country of 65 million, possibly more, is quite small. So they want to increase the base from 7.6 million to, let's say 30 million, for example, so that when they look at the top bracket, we increase that number from 1.6 million people. If we double it, triple it, that will also increase the tax collection efforts. If you look at companies, there are millions of companies that are registered and operating in South Africa, but only 1,000 contribute 70% of the corporate income tax that's collected. So if you look at those numbers, you see that not enough people are paying taxes, and SARS is at a point now where they need to collect more. Enter Project AmaBillions. So Project AmaBillions is a code name that SARS employees have where they're talking about this drive to collect more revenue. So there are a number of elements involved in this drive, and this is going to impact you and your business in the near future. So what is this drive? Let's start with the legal structure first. So the Tax Administration Act was amended recently to give SARS more powers to penalize people for non-compliance. What this means is you could face penalties up to jail time for not updating your information on e-filing or for not having your returns up to date. So the penalties are not just you not having a tax compliance certificate, you could actually have yourself thrown into prison. While that's very unlikely, it is something that SARS has put into their arsenal. If we add on to that, SARS has been recruiting more auditors, investigators, debt collectors, and they have been using AI and advanced data analytics to be able to analyze the information they have and to come after people who are not paying their taxes. On the data collection side, they are now collecting more from banks, from vehicle registrations, from the deeds office. They have information sharing agreements with other countries where the revenue authorities in those countries can share information. So if you are operating in that country, whether in your personal capacity or through your business, they will be able to get some insight into what your activities are there and what you're reporting in that country. So with this increased data collection effort and advanced analytics and artificial intelligence, they're able to now start painting a picture of what your tax bracket is. So if you haven't filed your taxes over the last 3 years or more, SARS will now be painting a picture of their own of what they think you should have paid in your taxes. what they think you actually made in your revenues in South Africa and outside South Africa. In addition to that, they have social media access. So they're doing lifestyle audits, where if your social media profile is showing one picture and that picture does not align with your returns or your non-submission of returns, then they're going to be doing an audit on you. So we know about some high profile cases where, let's start with Hamilton Ndlovu. Allegedly, SARS does not publish this information, so we're going off of news reports. Hamilton Ndlovu was posting his luxury vehicles that he had purchased, and in so doing, SARS then started a lifestyle audit, and that case then moved on to the Hawks because there were tenders involved and all sorts of things. There was a case of Sean Mkhize. Sean Mkhize was a football club owner and had a lot of antics in social media and had allegedly a debt of 40 million rand, and SARS ended up seizing some of her assets in order to collect on that. There's also the case of Dr. Malinga. Dr. Malinga talked about how SARS seized his properties and auctioned off those properties, and he still had to pay the balance on that debt. So these are just some high profile cases. Remember, SARS has specialized units, and one of those units focuses on high net worth individuals and social media and the like. So these are some of the measures they're putting in place in order to capacitate themselves to collect more. What this means is, if your information is not up to date, if your returns are not up to date, and if your debt is not paid, you may find yourself in a position where SARS is less lenient on you as they used to be in the past. So what then happens if you're behind on your taxes? So we're going to talk about the escalation route that's going to happen that you can anticipate if you're behind on your taxes. So the first thing is your tax clearance certificate. Because now the tax clearance status is a live status, if you haven't filed last month, your tax clearance status changes to non-compliant. So it's a live thing where the day that you are non-compliant, your tax compliance certificate is basically null and void. If you don't have that tax compliance certificate and you're not logged in onto SARS, you may find that your notifications will start to increase. You get more and more notifications. So that's why it's important to make sure your information on e-filing is up to date so you can get these notifications. We'll talk about why that's important when we discuss the step-by-step process for you to fix your taxes. On top of the escalating notifications, so you'll see your penalties and interest will start to increase. So they'll just go higher and higher with time based on the debts that you owe. On top of that, SARS can then start taking a number of measures. So remember, ultimately, if you are a business owner, and a director of that business, you may be personally pursued as a director because you're being negligent, or your company is negligent and you are responsible. So SARS may be able to come after directors of businesses who are non-compliant. Further, SARS can then have your debt sent to third-party debt collectors in order for them to collect and chase you down. But more importantly, they can do garnishee orders. They can have the bank pay them directly. So they can just take the money from your account, and you may find that your account is frozen and things like that. So SARS has more teeth to execute on these measures. So is it as bad as it sounds? It's important to remember that SARS is not looking to make criminals out of people. SARS is looking to convert people into taxpayers. So that rehabilitation process, SARS' main interest is to get you to comply and pay your taxes, because you're going to be a taxpayer for the rest of your life. So they have a bigger incentive to recruit people to become taxpayers. What this means is they're a lot more lenient on people who are complying and who are making efforts to correct and remedy the situation. However, if you are avoiding your taxes, or you are ignoring it completely, you fall into a separate category where they will come after you, and they have better tools to do so. As I mentioned before, in the past, SARS wasn't able to collect a wide set of information to see into your bank records, to see what your employer is filing, and to see your social media and other things to create that picture of what you should be paying, or at least what they think you should be paying. But now they have those tools, so you may not be able to get away with it. So it's important that you do not put your head in the sand when it comes to your taxes. First step, make sure that your information is up to date so you can receive these notifications and just know what's going on before you can take any action. So, how do we fix this situation? Before we get started, the first thing you need to do is to make sure you take a deep breath. You need to acknowledge this situation, and you need to understand that you're going to deal with the situation. If you start dealing with the situation and then go back to hiding, you're going to make matters worse for yourself. But if you take the situation head on, there are lots of options available, which we're going to discuss. So make sure you take that deep breath before you get started, acknowledge the situation. Let's deal with it. So first step, as I already mentioned, make sure your information is up to date on SARS. Get to understand what the notices are saying. If you have notices on SARS, pull all the information, gather the data to understand what is SARS saying, what do they need from you, where do you fall short. Whether you have any notices or not, you're going to now need to assess the situation in your business, in your personal finances. You need to collect all the information that you have in terms of your income, your expenses, the salary that you've drawn from your business, etc., and put that together. You need to put together your annual financial statements. So that's your income statement, your balance sheet. If you're a business owner, you need to do that for your business and in your personal capacity. And you now need to also make sure you collect all your invoices and receipts, your expense reports. In some cases, you may need to do your vehicle logbooks, your trip reports, to make sure that you collect all the information and you get to understand the full picture for your business. What are you looking for here? You're looking to understand, do you have a VAT liability? What's your PAYE situation? How much did you earn from your business? And how much is due to you in your personal capacity and due to the business? You need to understand what your income tax liability actually is based on this information. So if you haven't filed for a number of years, it's likely that you do not have invoices and receipts. So you're most likely going to rely on your bank statements to create your financial statements. But any piece of information that you still have, you need to collect all of that together. Before I move on, I need to remind you, you are required by law to keep your receipts, your invoices for up to 5 years. Because at any time, if you're audited, if you're asked, they will need that information. So there's a bit of a risk here if you do not have that information available, that if you are audited, they may disallow certain expenses if you don't have the proof document, which is your receipt or your invoice. But once you collect all of that information, you do your annual financial statements, you're going to do some recons. So if you were due to pay VAT, you need to do a VAT recon. If there's some PAYE involved, you need to do a PAYE recon. If you have assets for the business that you are using, you'll need to do a reconciliation to match the two. Okay, great. You've taken a deep breath and you're tackling the situation head on. You've compiled all the notices from SARS and you understand what is required of you. You've also compiled your information and you understand and have a clear picture of your business and personal finances. Now, let's move to the game plan. Our game plan is we make sure that we study the different sections of the different acts that apply to the specific case. So we'll look at a specific section of the Income Tax Act or a specific section of the VAT Act to understand where your business stands and what your rights and responsibilities are. In addition to that, we will do a case law study to understand which cases have been upheld in court, so what was enforced by the courts, and where taxpayers have won against SARS in court. That then gives us confidence to choose which path we're going to pursue and know that this path is a winning path. So there are different avenues. However, if you're in a situation where you do have a liability and you're going to have to pay on that liability, if you study your act, the sections of the act, and you understand that in this particular case, you have to pay your debt and there are no other options for you. In that case, as I mentioned earlier, SARS does have some options available for people who are complying and working with them. What are those options? You can pursue a voluntary disclosure program where you have undeclared items in the past that you want to declare now. With the VDP, you are able to make those declarations without incurring harsh penalties and interest. Basically, you're coming clean, and SARS says because you came clean, we'll waive some penalties on this matter. You will still have to pay what you owe on those declared amounts. The second item is a request for remission. You have a debt, it's now incurred penalties and interest over time, and those penalties and interests have accumulated to a considerable amount, and you want to have that waived. You do a request for remission. You may have extenuating circumstances that led to you being in that situation, and you can use those to submit your request for remission. In addition, you can ask for a compromise on the debt to have it reduced, so you pay a lower amount on the debt that you actually owe. You also have the option to do a suspension of payment if you are objecting or appealing a situation and pursuing a dispute resolution path. But going back to the options that SARS have, let's say, for example, you owe 100,000 in total, and of that 100,000, 20,000 is penalties and interest. You can then submit a request for remission to have the 20,000 waived, so you only have 80,000 left, which was, let's say, the original debt. On that original debt, you would have to ask for a compromise of debt to make sure that's reduced even further. If you want to have that reduced, say, to 40,000 Rand. On that 40,000 Rand that you now need to pay, you can ask for a payment arrangement to have that paid over time. But if you have done your case law study and understand the different sections of the Act, and you feel that you do not owe SARS, you can then do an objection or an appeal and follow their dispute resolution process. And in that process, you will then be asking for a suspension of payment. Basically, you're saying you want to hold on payment until this matter is resolved. So the suspension of payment is going to be the option that you pursue. If you are pursuing a path where you are objecting or appealing a decision made by SARS, it will depend on the stage of the case on what your options are going to be. And you can then take the appropriate action, whether it's an objection or an appeal, or you want to escalate the matter further. So I've had a client in the past who was at a stage where they had a final demand letter from SARS, and SARS was now escalating the situation. So when they came to me, they were worried that they don't have the money to pay this, and because they hadn't seen the notices prior, this was sudden to them, right? So we then compiled their information. It turns out they had a rental property that they were earning rental income on, and SARS had disallowed certain expenses. We then studied the relevant sections and understood that these were allowable expenses. We then prepared our case and did an objection, and they won that case. In that case, they were able to move from a final demand on the debt to having a refund from SARS, which was actually paid out. So it's important for you to understand that running from the situation makes it worse. Dealing with it, depending on your actual circumstances, you may find that you're in a better position. For most people, if you haven't filed your taxes in the last 3, 5, 7 years, you're going to have to pay something. So you're likely going to have to pursue the suspension of payment, the payment installment, the request for remission, or one of those avenues. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you found value in it. If you have, please like the video and subscribe so other entrepreneurs just like you can find this content. I'll see you guys on the next one.